At Dean L 1988 asks, I remember towards the end of Notes from a Factory Floor, you described feeling anxious about a particular possible health issue that might arise. How do you control your fear in relation to something that is essentially out of your hands, such as that?
The good thing about that health issue was I was going through a regenerative period. In spiritual practice, they call it a shattering. So you're basically taken to your knees, and anything that's negative in you is removed. I've been through that process several times. It doesn't happen all in one go, and that was a particularly dark time, because I was working on subject matters that or removing parasites that were really deeply embedded. And I would say that it wasn't me that was feeling those fears, it was those elements in me that needed to be removed. So I overcame it by continuing the process. So I was going through a period of repentance. In other words, all the negative stuff inside me was being consumed into vapor and pushed out as energy. So it was being burned up. They call it the burnt offering, which is always a sin offering. So all the sin that was in me, all the negativity that was in me, all the violence was being burned up and delivered through the work I was doing. So one of the things I had to leave was this fear of illness and all the stuff that came with that. And I overcame it by eventually just surrendering to it. I was inspired by it because I could feel that my beliefs were creating my illness. I knew it, but I was too far gone to get it out of my system. I remember at one stage during that illness, I went for cancer checks and stuff. I remember that my sensitivity was so alive that if somebody said a symptom, I would feel the symptom in my body immediately. And at one point I had 5 or 6 symptoms, including blood in my urine, of cancer, and they were all brought on by a fearful perception. And I even said to the doctor, I'm aware that this is psychosomatic, but I need to go through the tests just to clear myself, because I was so tired, I just couldn't overcome it. Eventually I had to just surrender. I surrendered it and I gave it over to God. But when I came out of it, I was literally on my knees. And I remember thinking, I'm going to work on this now. I'm going to work on not allowing in any perceptions into my mind unless I vet them first. So I started to recognize that illness and fear and depression all existed at the level of perception, and that if I had a strong enough center, a strong enough eye wall, I could at the highest level, I could prevent all of that just by not allowing it in, by not engaging it, by not identifying with it. So that was part of my spiritual fasting. So I was fasting out all of the negativity. But it just encouraged me to do more and more of it. So everything I've ever written, everything I've ever spoken about, everything I've ever taught was all part of that spiritual fasting, or part of that repentance. There's a lovely story in the Old Testament about David and Goliath. And the story is basically about the shepherd who kills the giant Philistine with a stone. But when you look at the esoteric meaning of it, David was said to have killed the Goliath ego, or the Goliath Satan, by fasting him out of his body. So the sling and arrow was a simile for fasting. He was able to reduce this negative element in him to the point where he could kill it with as little as a stone, or with as little as a rock. And of course a rock is always symbolic of Jesus. It's always a simile for Jesus, or for the Christ energy. So when you read the story of David and Goliath, it reads as a small man killing a big man, but the actual esoteric meaning is that we can defeat the Satan just with the Christ energy, just with the God energy. But we have to fast out all of the fears, all of the anxieties, all of the negative perceptions. We have to fast them out of our body. When we fast them out of our body expands with the Christ energy, with consciousness. And then with consciousness, the Satan is easily killed, or is easily defeated, because it's not us that's doing it. So it was a great lesson for me. I was in a place of abject terror, but I was also in a place of inspiration. And I'm not ashamed to say to you that I was crying a lot. I was absolutely on my knees. But it wasn't until that point that I was able to surrender my ego and give it over to God. That's when I surrendered it, because I knew I couldn't fix this on my own. And I went down the hospital for tests. I'll tell you this story, it's interesting. The hardest thing about this wasn't going for tests, it was the idea that I was going to go and sit in a room for hours on end waiting for the tests, and then weeks and weeks waiting for results, and it felt like agony. But I understood it was part of the repentance I was going through. And this voice said to me, just turn up, we'll do the rest. And I got to the hospital and I pulled a ticket out and it said something like number 13 on it. And I looked on the clock and my number had been called already. I thought I was going to be there for hours. My number had been called before I even arrived at the hospital. And I went to the nurse and I said, oh, I've got this number, but it says on there already. She said, yeah, you've been called. So it was very metaphysical. I was looked after all the way, but I had to surrender my ego. And I didn't surrender to my ego until my ego was in a place of terror. I remember walking around Kumabi, falling onto my knees and begging God to take this out of me. And all he was asking me to do was give it over to him, surrender it to him. When I surrendered it to him, everything became clear. And then I built myself back up again, but my will was already surrendered. So I overcame it by surrendering it, by surrendering myself to God. This is what happened with Arjuna at the Battle of Guru, etc., when he was in terror and he wanted to run away. He's fighting for his kingdom, but he wants to run away, and he wants to become a mendicant, and he wants to renounce his kingdom. And Krishna says to him, "Just you won't fix this problem. You can't fix this problem. But if you surrender to me, it's already fixed." So that was what I learned from that. It was about surrender. So I've kept myself in that place of surrender. I don't know what I'm doing. I just give it over to God. I don't make the decisions. I just give them over to him. And I'm certain that everything will be fine, because everything is.
At Jim Lifestyle _daily asks, could you please tell what motivates you?
What motivates me is I just want to understand. I want to grow. I want to learn. I'm excited every day to get up and to find myself doing work that really challenges me. I find myself in the burn every day, but it's an exciting anabolic burn. I feel as though I'm around. I feel as though if I was bodybuilding, I'd be around Dorian Yates, or if I was in karate, I'd be around Terry O'Neill. I feel as though I'm surrounded by these amazing incorporeal teachers. And it inspires me. What motivates me is to keep growing and to keep learning. So there's always something for me to go at every single day. Every day when I get up early to meditate, every day when I sit down to write, every day when anything tries to assail me, I'm always just aware that I'm here to grow. I'm here to learn. And I don't know how long I've got. I could be yanked out of the corner of my kitchen this afternoon, so I've got to make the best of it. I've got to make sure that every single day I'm collecting nectar and I'm collecting pollen to take back to the hive. If I'm not, then my time here is wasted.
At 49NUP asks, what's your biggest failure and your greatest achievement?
The biggest failure, I think, was I would say I wasn't a good father. I wasn't a good parent. I was a selfish, greedy, self-indulgent man. I love my kids, and my kids would I was sure would defend me, but I know I wasn't a good father, and I'm working very hard to be a better parent now. I can see the damage on my kids from decisions I made when I was younger. I had no idea what I was doing, but I did it, so I wasn't a good parent. I'm a good dad now. I'm trying to pass on what I'm learning to my kids. My biggest success was when I surrendered to God, when I surrendered to my highest faculty. That was my highest achievement, and that's something I need to maintain every day.
At KevBeg1 asks, may I ask if Mr. Thompson will be doing any more guided walks or public talks in the future?
Hi Kev, yeah, I am going to set up some walks, so if there's anybody that wants to come on a walk, if you could let Gabriela have your email, when we set up a date, we will contact you directly and give you the opportunity to come on. I've got one coming up in July. I may do another one in August. So yeah, I will be doing some more.
At Cold Water Patrol asks, what should you do when you are confronted by depression?
Lean into it. Try and be really brave. Lean into it. Be curious about it. If you've got depression in you, depression means that something is depressed and it's trying to rise. And it needs to go through a process of individuation. Individuation means that something unconscious wants to come into conscious knowing so it can be processed. So for depression to be debilitating, you have to engage it. You have to identify with it. But if you're able to watch the feelings and let them rise and sit in the feelings and don't be intimidated by them, eventually they will pass. So depression is always an open doorway. It's always an invite to go to another level of learning. So I'm saying that if it's in your life, it's good. Although I know how intimidating it can be because I've experienced it, but I've experienced it lots of times, and I always just turn into it. I always just go straight into it. And if I feel it's threatening, I'll just say, come in more. Come in, have a sit down, have a cup of tea. I welcome it in. This technique has been used by St. Francis, it's been used by Viktor Frankl, it's been used by Milarepa. Viktor Frankl called it paradoxical intention. The thing that you're afraid of, deliberately invite it in greater proportions. Francis was assailed by 4 demons in a cellar when his father locked him up. And he said, when they assailed him, he said to them, if you're here, it's because it's ordained. And if it's ordained, then I accept it. And if you're not ordained, you can disappear. He said, you're threatening to take my body, you're threatening to take my health, take it. This body's a liability anyway. He said they attacked him all the more, so he turned to God and said, thank you. Thank you for this, I accept it. I accept all this, please send me more. And then they just disappeared like that. So paradoxical intention is a spiritual technique, but it's also a psychological technique. If we're curious about the feelings that rise in us, and we want to understand them more, and we lean into them, and rather than try and cover them or run away from them, those feelings will, if you're curious, you will automatically disengage the fear. It will become a background noise. The main thing with it is be prepared for it to stay as long as it wants to stay. Don't put any time limit on it, and just keep leaning into it, just keep looking at it. If you can absorb 99% of it, it will dissipate. This is from my own experience, this is what I experienced. And when I leaned into that and I absorbed 99% of it, it was like a wonder world opened up to me. Because it turned out that depression was a lie. And if depression's a lie, what else is a lie? Fear's a lie. All of these perceptions are just subjective truths. All of these concepts and precepts, all of these beliefs, all of these, pretty much everything you hear on the television is just a fear-based subjective truth. You don't have to engage any of it. So I would just say that if you can lean into something like depression and have a communication with it. I remember it rising in my stomach once, as a pain, as a grumble, as a bloat, and I'd learned enough by this stage to turn straight into it. And I said, I hear you. I can hear your complaint. What do you want? And this energy in me spoke to me. He said, you know what I want. I said, I don't know what you want. You need to tell me what you want. What do you want? And he said, I want to be out of you. I want to be out of you, and I want eternity out of you. Now, at this time, I was practicing a lot of spiritual fasting. So I was reducing my body. I was reducing any vice that was coming into my body, and I was getting rid of any vice that was in my body. So any parasites left in me, I had nothing to feed on. So this energy wanted to come out. So it said, I want eternity out of you in Romans. And Romans was a feature film that I've been thinking of writing about the metaphysical power of forgiveness. So I said, okay, I will write you out of me and I'll put you into Romans. And that's what I did. And then the feeling went away. So I transmuted this energy, I transfigured it, I brought it out and I channeled it and I put it into this. The film's called Retaliation now. So these energies are sentient, they're semi-autonomous thought forms, and you can communicate with them. And if you can be curious and disengage the fear, or don't engage the fear, you can find a way to get them out of your body. But you can't starve them and feed them at the same time. You can't have energies in your body that are, like vice energies. You can't starve them out if you're still watching sexual pornography or violent pornography, or if you're overeating or over drinking, or if you're overindulging, if you're still judgmental, if you're still gossiping, if you're still unkind. You can't starve what you're feeding. So in order to spiritually fast, we have to starve ourselves of all of that negativity. We have to get rid of all of it from our life. When you start to do that kind of starvation, that spiritual fasting, these energies will rise up to feed, and there's nothing there to feed, and then they kick off a little bit. That's your chance to bring them into, to individuate them. Again, I'm probably not doing a great job of explaining it, but if you get a chance to read Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, he talks about this a lot, and I talk about his book a lot because it's the leading book in the world, and he's managed to simplify this process. It's not a simple process, it's very complex, but he's managed to simplify it. But basically what Eckhart Tolle teaches is that we start to observe the feelings, and when we observe them without engagement, without identification, they will dissipate. But what he doesn't mention in the book is that his technique is the summation of all of Buddhism. In Buddhism, there's a technique called dependent arising, and it was the technique that the Buddha talked about after he had his enlightenment. He talked about it. It's the thing he talked about most for the rest of his life. Dependent arising. It basically means this relies on that, and that relies on this. Everything relies on something. What it's fundamentally saying is that if we don't engage things, they don't exist. If we engage them, we give them existence. If anger rises and I engage anger, anger has life in me and through me. Anger becomes me. If I see anger but I don't engage it, and I just watch it like an energy, like a cloud, and watch it pass, it will dissipate. It's the same with any feeling, with any energy. So dependent arising or dependent origination is all of Buddhism, and Eckhart Tolle manages to masterfully simplify it in his book, The Power of Now.